By then, Byrd had completed 2 successful trips to Antarctica. He was well on his way to being considered a legendary explorer.
In the frozen silence of Antarctica, where endless miles of white stretch farther than the human eye can comprehend, where the wind screams like a living creature and the ice towers rise higher than cathedrals, there is a secret that has been buried not for decades but for almost a century, a secret so heavy, so extraordinary, that it has survived not because it was remembered but because it was deliberately erased, locked away in archives stamped, classified, and for 80 years only one man carried it inside him, a 19-year-old sailor who became a 102-year-old witness. And when at last he broke his silence, the world learned that what we have been told about Antarctica, about its barren emptiness, about its supposed lack of human history, might not be the whole truth at all. For this man, Robert Johnson, claimed to have descended into a place where no human eyes were meant to wander, a cavern warmed by impossible heat, carved with markings no language on earth could explain, and resonating with a hum that seemed alive. And to understand why Johnson's revelation was not madness but perhaps the most important confession of the 20th century, we must return to the man at the center of it all, Admiral Richard E. Byrd, who even in his lifetime was more legend than flesh, a figure who straddled the strange line between explorer, soldier, and symbol, a man whose career embodied not just the spirit of his age but also its shadows, its secrets, its obsessions with discovery, power, and silence. Byrd, born in 1888, came of age in a United States still stretching its arms outward, still defining itself as a nation that could compete with the empires of Europe in exploration, technology, and conquest. And by the time he made his first expeditions, the public was starved for figures who could embody courage in an era when the world seemed both bigger and smaller than ever. Bigger because technology was revealing the depths of oceans, the peaks of mountains, and the frozen poles, but smaller because flight, radio, and film were stitching continents together with a speed that made old mysteries feel suddenly within reach, and Byrd became exactly the hero that age demanded, claiming in 1926 to have flown over the North Pole in a Fokker trimotor, an achievement lauded by the press even though skeptics later questioned the logs. But at the time none of that mattered. For the world needed its heroes, and Byrd played the part perfectly, appearing in photographs with his fur-lined hood, his gaze fixed on horizons no ordinary man would dare chase. And for this he was awarded the Medal of Honor, celebrated not just as a soldier but as an embodiment of American daring. Yet beneath the accolades was a man haunted not by the glory of what he found but by the mystery of what he could not explain. When Byrd turned his attention southward, to Antarctica, he entered not just a frozen wasteland but a stage upon which secrets older than humanity itself may have been buried, and from his first great expedition in 1928 to his later returns, those who followed his career noticed that something about his Antarctic work carried a weight, an urgency, even a secrecy that his other exploits did not. For while the maps, meteorological data, and dramatic photographs were shared with the public, there were always details missing. Always moments that those closest to him recalled in hushed tones, moments when Byrd seemed troubled, reluctant to speak, as though carrying a burden too heavy for ordinary conversation. And as the years passed and his operations grew larger, more heavily funded, and more deeply entangled with military intelligence, it became clear to some that Antarctica was more than just ice and science, more even than minerals and strategy, but a vault of mysteries that could not be shared with the public. By the 1940s, rumors began to ripple through the tight circles of military and government. Rumors of vast mineral wealth under the ice, of uranium that could fuel the new atomic age, of magnetic anomalies that threw navigational equipment into chaos, of sightings of strange lights in the sky above the poles, of auroras that seemed to freeze in deliberate patterns rather than flow like natural phenomena. And though none of these rumors were ever confirmed, Byrd's silence about them was often more telling than any denial, for he was a man who chose his words carefully, who understood that saying nothing was itself a kind of answer. And so when the Second World War ended and the Cold War began, when nations scrambled to secure not just territories but secrets, Byrd returned to Antarctica with an expedition so vast that its official explanation, mere training and mapping, rang hollow even at the time. For Operation High Jump in 1947 involved more than 4,000 men, a fleet of 13 ships, and dozens of aircraft, a scale far beyond any scientific need. And among the thousands chosen to serve was Robert Johnson, a young seaman from San Diego, who had grown up with the salt of the Pacific on his skin and the discipline of the Navy in his blood, but who could never have imagined the role he would play in history. Johnson expected drills, cold, exhaustion, the endless monotony of snow, but instead found himself pulled into a current of secrecy from the moment he was summoned not to a barracks or ship but to a small room, dimly lit, where Admiral Byrd himself sat across from him, studying him with the sharp gaze of a man who had learned to weigh souls rather than resumes. And after what felt like an eternity, Byrd asked one simple question: "Can you keep a secret?" And when Johnson, bewildered but steady, said yes, his life took a turn from which there was no return, for he had just been initiated into the innermost circle of an expedition whose true purpose would never be written in official records. The early weeks of Operation High Jump were grueling but not unusual. Ships plowing through pack ice, planes flying reconnaissance over white expanses that seemed endless. But slowly, quietly, Johnson began to notice the fractures in the official narrative. Pilots returning pale, shaken, unable or unwilling to describe what they had seen. Men whispering of open water far inland where there should have been nothing but frozen plateau. Rumors of valleys strangely green, of mountains giving off heat. Signatures of objects moving across the sky too large and too fast to be ordinary aircraft. And while some laughed such whispers away as the natural inventions of tired men in an alien landscape, Johnson felt the tension building, the way even seasoned officers grew quiet at night, staring into the sky as if expecting something to reveal itself. And then, in the 12th week, the real purpose of his selection was revealed when he was ordered into a small overland team dispatched to a location marked only by a red circle on a map, a location no one explained. And as Johnson carried that silence across decades, the world itself shifted in strange synchrony with the weight of what he had seen. For scarcely 2 years after Operation High Jump ended, Byrd returned to Antarctica under the quiet banner of Operation Deep Freeze, but this time his words slipped into the public sphere in a way that startled those paying attention. For during a 1947 interview with a Chilean newspaper, Byrd was quoted as warning that the United States must prepare to defend itself against enemies that could strike from the polar regions at incredible speed, a statement so unusual, so out of step with conventional military thinking, that even now historians argue over what he meant, some insisting it was a mistranslation, others suggesting Byrd was hinting at aircraft technologies unknown to the public, and still others believing he was speaking, however cautiously, about what he had truly encountered beneath the ice. And though that comment was swiftly buried by official narratives, it remained like a crack in the facade, an echo of something vast and hidden. Around the same time, other currents of rumor swirled, stories that Nazi Germany, before its fall, had dispatched expeditions to Antarctica, claiming a territory known as New Schwabenland, and that they had constructed bases beneath the ice, hidden fortresses where technology far beyond the war's apparent capabilities was developed, including disc-shaped craft that could rise vertically and maneuver in ways that mocked the laws of aerodynamics. And though mainstream historians dismiss these as propaganda or fantasy, Johnson, in the quiet of his later years, admitted that when he heard such rumors, his mind returned to the fissure, to the markings, to the hum that no earthly machine could produce, and he wondered whether Byrd himself had wrestled with the same thought, that the cavern they found was not the work of human hands at all but something far older, far stranger, perhaps the remnants of a civilization that predated ours, or perhaps evidence that we were not alone in shaping this planet's hidden places. The rumors did not end there. In the 1950s, as UFO sightings swept across America and the Cold War drove paranoia to new heights, a curious pattern emerged. Reports of glowing disks over the polar skies, pilots claiming to have seen lights darting in and out of cloud banks near the poles, accounts swiftly ridiculed yet recorded nonetheless in classified files. And for those who knew of Byrd's expedition, who whispered about Johnson's long-guarded secret, these sightings were not isolated curiosities but fragments of a larger, stranger puzzle. The strangeness deepened with the signing of the Antarctic Treaty in 1959, when 12 nations agreed that the continent would remain free of military activity and exploitation, ostensibly for the sake of science and peace. But critics noted the oddity. Never before in history had nations set aside a landmass so rich in resources, uranium, coal, and untapped oil, without conflict, without claim. And some suggested that the treaty was not about preservation, but about containment, about ensuring that what Byrd's men had glimpsed would never again be disturbed. For Johnson, now aging, now long removed from the chain of command, the treaty was like a confirmation, an echo of the vow he had made at 19, a signal that the world's powers had quietly agreed to bury the secret as thoroughly as the cavern itself was buried in ice. Yet whispers persisted, fueled by scattered anomalies, satellites detecting magnetic disturbances in certain Antarctic regions, seismic readings hinting at vast hollow chambers beneath the ice, and most intriguingly, the discovery of Lake Vostok, a body of water sealed beneath 2 miles of ice, isolated for millions of years, whose dark ecosystem remained untouched and unknown, as though mocking the world with the suggestion that entire hidden realms might lie waiting beneath the frozen crust. Realms not unlike the cavern Johnson had seen with his own eyes. The hollow earth theories, often dismissed as fantasy, gained new vigor among conspiracy theorists, who pointed to Byrd's supposed lost diary, an alleged account that spoke of flights into warm, verdant lands hidden within the poles, of contact with beings beyond human comprehension. And while mainstream scholars declared the diary a fabrication, Johnson, though cautious, could not shake the parallels, for though he had not seen a world within the earth, he had seen a cavern where warmth and soil and markings existed where none should, and that was enough to keep the door of possibility open. As the decades advanced, technology expanded humanity's ability to peer into Antarctica from afar. Yet the mystery only deepened. Satellite images occasionally showing structures too regular to be natural, later scrubbed from databases. Reports of expeditions halted without explanation. Whispers of researchers dying under strange circumstances, their findings unpublished, their names fading into silence. And always the treaty, renewed, strengthened, ensuring that no one nation, no corporation, no private explorer could pierce too deeply into the continent's secrets. For Johnson, now an old man, each new anomaly was like a ghost of his own memory, a reminder that the hum he had felt in his bones, the markings that shifted when his eyes lingered, were not dreams but fragments of a truth still pulsing beneath the ice, waiting for a reckoning. And as the Cold War raged above the surface, with nuclear submarines prowling oceans and satellites watching skies, Antarctica remained curiously untouched, a stage of silence in a world of noise. And perhaps that silence itself was the loudest clue, that something was being protected, hidden, preserved, not for the sake of ice and penguins, but for the sake of humanity's fragile readiness. When at last, in his final year, Johnson broke his silence, speaking of the fissure, the hum, the impossible markings, he was not simply unburdening himself of a memory but pulling at the threads of a tapestry that stretches across a century. Byrd's strange words, Nazi whispers, UFO sightings, the Antarctic Treaty, satellite anomalies, all of it weaving into a single suggestion, that beneath the white veil of Antarctica lies a truth so profound, so destabilizing, that entire governments agreed. It must remain hidden until the world itself changes, until humanity is ready, or until the ice itself chooses to give up its secret.